Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Philippa Webb. I'm Professor of Public International Law here at the Blavatnik School, and I am delighted to welcome back to the Blavatnik School Hélène Landemore. Hélène is Professor of Political Science at Yale University. She has worked with governments, NGOs, and citizens from France and Finland, Chile, Argentina, and Taiwan. And we are here to discuss her new book, Politics Without Politicians, The Case for Citizen Rule. I'm just going to start with a snapshot of the political landscape, which is a reason why your work is so timely. So according to the VDEM Institute, the world has fewer democracies than autocracies for the first time in over 20 years. 72% of the global population live in autocracies, and that's the highest since 1978. And even within democracies, 1 in 4 democracies is run by a populist. President Trump's current net approval rating, according to The Economist, is minus 17. Prime Minister Starmer is minus 57. And President Macron has the lowest approval of all the European leaders at the moment. But that's just opinion polls. Quite apart from that, we are facing huge challenges in the world that we are hoping and waiting for our politicians to step up to. Conflict, climate, economic stagnation, rising extremism, polarization, and inequality. So this does seem like a very good time for fresh thinking or even for going back to the future, as you propose in your book. So I'm going to ask a few questions to Hélène to set us up, but then we very much, in the spirit of your book, want to hear from you. So please think of your questions and we'll be turning to you shortly. So first, Hélène, please, maybe you could just sketch out for us in a few minutes the argument that you make in your book.
Right. So thank you, Pippa. I want to thank the Blavatnik School of Policy for inviting me. I'm delighted to be back. So I make a negative argument and a positive argument in the book. The negative one is about the fact that I think the electoral model of democracy that we're familiar with and used to calling democracy is actually failing in a systemic way, not because of particular historic circumstances or economic contingencies. I think there's a fundamental flaw at the heart of that system that leads it to be too oligarchic for its own good and sort of muddling through from crisis to crisis until populists will end up taking over. But I'm not really interested in revisiting the more negative part. I think the center of the book, the heart of the book, is really the optimistic, positive argument and the positive message, which is that there is a solution, an alternative model of democracy that centers randomly selected citizens, so large juries of everyday people, as opposed to elected officials and representatives. And in some ways, it is indeed a return to the future in the sense that it's going back to an ancient model that we're actually quite familiar with, classical Athens and its use of sortition, meaning lot, and open assemblies, but modernizing it to apply to large, industrialized, diverse, and slavery-free nations, right? So that's the message of the book, and it's an argument I've made before as well in academic books, centrally my book called Open Democracy.
Mm-hmm.
But in this book, I wanted to make the argument more, to humanize the argument by telling the story of experiments and processes that I've observed and been a part of in France. So specifically 2 citizens' assemblies conducted respectively on climate justice and the question of the end of life, so the possibility of allowing assisted suicide and euthanasia. And these are 2 large deliberative assemblies that convened in one case 150 randomly selected citizens, and in the second case 184 of them from all around France, including our overseas territories. And they were paid to come and debate those tough issues, come up with recommendations, and sitting on the in the galleries observing them or talking to them, I encountered so many stories. I experienced their emotions, including emotions that I didn't expect to be present in this sort of environment necessarily. And I wanted to tell that story. So that's kind of like the book in a 5 minutes summary.
Wonderful. I love your argument in the book that shy people may be the key to fixing democracy. And you quote G.K. Chesterton that his definition of democracy, all real democracy is an attempt like that of a jolly hostess to bring the shy people out. What does that quote mean for your argument?
So I ran into that quote and I thought, what an unusual and inspiring definition. I also didn't know what he meant by the shy, but I instantly knew that it spoke to me and that I wanted to do something with this. So for me, the shy are of course, the natural introverts, the one that would never win an election, could never win an election, even if they had the guts to try and sell themselves that way. But it's also the people who are, in fact, made shy by the system, by years of, whether it's neglect or indifference or oppression or, all kinds of marginalization. And I think it turned out I'm pretty convinced that that's most of us in a way. And I like that vocabulary of the shy because I think we're at a point in political theory, in political science, in politics in general, where there's some fatigue with with identity politics. Even if you think it did some good, it also has led to a lot of fracturing and a lot of polarization. And so the shy are a nice category. It's a nice category in that sense because anybody can be a shy person. It doesn't have to be connected to certain characteristics that are, getting more and more contentious. So in particular, when I try to find an illustration of the shy, so I don't say that in the book, but when I give PowerPoint presentations to my students to places, I use pictures. And one of them is a picture called A Shy Peasant. It's by Ilya Repin, who is a 19th century Russian sort of realist painter. And it's this, white guy who looks, desiccated and tired. And it's a Russian peasant at the turn of the 20th century, extremely poor, obviously, extremely tough life. He looks away into the corner of the canvas, and he has this piercing blue eye that is clearly full of intelligence and aspirations. And you sense that, well, this is someone who has so much to say and who has never allowed a voice in the, presumably the Russian Empire. And I feel like this could be a lot of people. So there's something, but another picture I use is that of the black lady in the famous painting by Manet, Olympia. It's kind of a forgotten figure where you focus on the naked white lady, but in fact there's also all these background characters in classical, the classics of paintings, and so I just think that there are multiple ways of being a shy person, and a lot of them have to do with the kind of class structure, racial hegemonies, beyond just the fact of being a natural introvert or something like that. So this is for me the meaning of the shy. And now, what does it mean for democracy to be like an attempt to be an attempt like that of a jolly hostess to bring the shy people out? It's so it's an attempt. So it doesn't mean it's going to be successful, first of all. And it's an attempt by a system or a structure or a way of being in the world that feels like a generous, jolly, jovial, cheerful lady. So, it's inspiring that it's a female figure also for a change. And she's trying to bring the wallflowers, off from the margins to the center of the room, to make them speak, to get them to have a good time. And it doesn't have to be the role of one person specifically or one institution specifically. It can be a distributed role that many people take on in a democracy, or many institutions take on in a democracy. But once you start running with that metaphor, I felt like it had incredible heuristic value, and it helped me reread the things that I'd observed in France and that I knew about in Ireland and in other places through that lens. And it helped me in the latter part of the book, coming up with what I call the 6 behavioral rules of a jolly hostess.
Yeah.
And these are the principles that I would hope institution designer would apply when they create any kind of democratic process, any kind of deliberative space, any kind of participatory mechanism to bring people together, like, not wasting people's time, like being trustworthy, not using their data, for example, for commercial purposes, like sharing power, very important one. So I have a list of 6 principles that I'll let you discover, but it's really, in a way, at the end of the day, what I would like people to take away from the book is perhaps an inspiration for how they should behave in their own regular life. If you're a boss, think about how can you be more like potentially a jolly hostess at work, right? And we because again, in the French context, this is also resonant because we have a lot of issues with the way work is structured, voice is not given to employees, and that partly explains to me the resistance to raising the age limit for retirement. People are very reluctant, but it's not just because they can't do the math, it's because they hate going to work. And so there's got to be a way we make people less oppressed, and I think that starts with giving them voice. So I think basically the 6 lessons of a jolly hostess are for bosses, but for employees too. Like you can be a jolly hostess to a degree. Share the it's for parents with our children. It's for all of us in our relationship with others, and so that's the idea.
Yeah. You also write, and actually, it's incredibly and deliberately personal. Your book.
Yeah.
So you write that you were shy, but then at age 12 you suddenly became popular and was elected class delegate.
Yes. Very traumatic
and experienced the corrupting effect of power. And then at 20 you were accepted into the école normale supérieure, which as you rightly say is not normal at all. It's the most elite institution in France, if not Europe. Then you went on to Sciences Po, Harvard and Yale. How did these experiences make you an advocate for the ordinary citizen against the elite?
Well, I think they did not initially, and that's the whole point. When I got into École Normale, actually I don't say that story in the book, so I'll say it to you. Immediately after I got in, it immediately went to my head. I got into an argument with my parents almost instantly, like 2 hours after I knew I got in. Because they were treating me like they've always treated me, with some form of annoying paternalism, and I just bristled. I thought, I'm now at École Normale Supérieure. So I don't know. I don't even remember what the reason was, but I know it was because of what the sort of jump in status that happened. And I've noticed that every single time in my life that something potentially very, very good has happened to me, it's also done something to my psyche and I think, it's very hard to stop it. So you have to be hyper aware and also measure the very bad consequences that follow. But I don't think everybody does. And unfortunately, that's one of the reasons why I'm so down on electoral systems, is that who ends up in power in an electoral system? People who want power more than anything, who are more likely to be corrupted by it, and which power is going to, in my view, sort of on which power will have this negative effect that I've seen happen. So I think if anything, my elitist training was going to put me on the path towards being an elitist of the worst kind, until I failed, which is a story I retrace in the book. And I failed very badly 3 times in a row. I didn't get the aggregation of philosophy.
No one knows what that is outside of France.
But anyway, it's one of those things where if you fail, it's like it's literally like it's a disaster, especially for someone like me who really defined herself exclusively through my grades and my sort of academic success, which is another lesson I don't dwell on in the book. But never define yourself for one thing only. It's a terrible idea. And so it really did a number on me, obviously, this massive failure, and I decided that I had to leave France and never come back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, pretty much. And I did leave, and
For
because
Harvard.
well, that's the thing. So that's why I don't want to throw a pity party too much, because obviously, you know, it's not that bad. But for me, given my self-definition, it was very bad. So, but then again, because I was already in an elite environment, I was given this extraordinary chance to go to Harvard for a year, and then I decided to apply for the PhD, and I stayed. But honestly, still, this failure, you know, the taste of this failure and the implication lingered for many, many years, which, of course, it had to make me redefine a bunch of things and question a number of assumptions I had about the way the world works, the way elite institutions function, the way people who are excluded from that system or fail in that system and never recover, you know, survive or not. And so I think that was like a formative experience for questioning the whole thing. Because I remember when I arrived at École Normale Supérieure, they kept talking to us as if we were going to rule the world. Like we were going to be the elite of the nation and this and that. So I was reading Plato at the same time, who was telling you that you needed philosopher kings. Yeah. And I honestly, like, I didn't question it. I just thought that was the right position.
Yeah. So you've gone to the other extreme.
And I've come to the other extreme where now, well, it's also because I was shy. I think what's very vicious about being a shy person, or being made to be a shy person in a way, is that you have so little self-confidence, so little self-esteem, that you tend to look up to people who have status, power, and control in a way that is so naive. You assume they know better. You assume you should defer your judgment to theirs. Yeah. And as I was, you know, overcoming that failure and regaining confidence and you know, slowly climbing in the system and getting a position at Yale and getting tenure, there's a point at which I'm like, wow, actually, I've met a number of like super smart people. I'm meeting more and more people that would think know what they're doing and are making all kinds of decisions. And I'm not that impressed. And in fact, many of them are totally winging it. And and it's fine, because in fact, like, we're all, you know, limited and finite. And what I really appreciate in the American system, which to me makes it more democratic than any other system, is that there's much less a cult of the all-knowing professor, for example, who you know, I grew up in an environment where if you admitted to not knowing something, it was kind of a shameful thing. Yeah. And American professors are not like that. Initially, it was almost embarrassing to see the limits of their knowledge and the fact that they acknowledged it. But it was also completely freeing, because then you're not afraid of failure. You're not afraid of. And the other thing is that my failure, which I really carried like a scarlet letter for years, they couldn't have cared less. Well, they couldn't have cared less, and honestly, it was like, how is this possible? So I don't know. It was very, very freeing, very liberating.
Yeah. So you mentioned in your opening the 2 citizens' assemblies you worked on in France. So if we could go back to that for a moment. What were the elements that you thought coming out maybe either made them a success, or that you would have changed to make them a success, a greater success?
Oh, there are many things that would have changed. I think the thing about what I want the audience also to live with is the sense that this is just the beginning. This project is a 200-year project, right? So the first Citizens' Assembly of note was 2004 in British Columbia, Canada. So we're only 22 years later. We've documented around maybe 800 to 1,000 mini publics of that kind, often very small, often at the local level. And they're not studied really well or in depth. And they're not conducted the best possible way. I think everybody's, again, winging it. All these people that I've met who are running these things do the best they can, but it's not like we have absolute knowledge of what works best. Yeah. So these processes made a lot of mistakes. The first one, but on the other hand, I'll tell you this, I thought that the first one was absolutely amazing. And unlike critics who say it was a failure, I actually think it was a milestone. Because my own work, my own academic work had convinced me that the best use of a citizens' assembly is agenda setting, right? So it's basically defining a set of goals, but then it's up to someone else, maybe an elected legislature, maybe a referendum or another body of, you know, people to legislate. Yeah. But Macron, I don't know where he got this idea from, but he said, you know what, my policy or law to pass a carbon tax triggered the Yellow Vest movement. That was in 2018. So I'm just going to ask this random group of 150 people to kind of legislate for me, because the executive has some sort of legislative power in France. So he outsourced, or he crowdsourced, if you want, the solution to climate change and climate justice to this group of 150. He basically said, you don't like my carbon tax, the French don't like my carbon tax, but then you come up with a better set of regulative, what do you call it?
Regulatory.
Legislative measures, is the phrase, to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 30% of the 1990s levels by 2030 or something like that. So, I mean, I don't think any assembly was empowered to that extent.
Yeah.
And hasn't been since then, actually. So, can you imagine you're from some place in Corrèze, or a small village. You're brought to Paris. Everything is paid for you. You're put up in a nice hotel, and you show up in this place called the Iéna Palace next to the Eiffel Tower, and you meet these other 149 people, and you're told you're going to be kind of like legislating on behalf of the rest of the country. It's pretty daunting. But somehow, and they didn't have that much time. They had 8 sessions, 8 weekends.
Yeah.
They had access to over 160 experts that they could call on and listen to. And they had a legal team that was in charge of translating their proposals into the legalese of the French constitution.
Yeah.
And they did a really decent job. I mean, when you see what came out, you can criticize left and right, I'm sure. I think that, but I think most of the things you can criticize, it's not so much their work as the setup, as the way it was run, the time constraints, the fact that they divided them into 5 subgroups instead of having them deal with everything. The fact that the agenda was probably not set the right way. It's very hard to sort of legislate about how to fix climate change if you don't also have access to the budget dimension of things, right? So I think all the mistakes are on the organizer's end, in my view.
Yeah. And on the second assembly, assisted dying, which is a big debate here in the UK at the moment.
Well, so, yes, I know that you're having the same problem. So the problem is that I suspect it's the same thing in the UK. In France, we know that 80% of the population is in favor of liberalizing the law. People want to be able to have access to an injection or some kind of pill if they can't take it anymore. It's reassuring, freeing. It feels, to them, it's a form of access to a dignified end somehow of their choice. And 20% are against for all kinds of reasons, including religious reasons, including the fear that it's going to have all kinds of like downstream effects that are bad. And I think, honestly, both sides have very, very good points. It's just the split is quite clearly in favor of the people in favor of liberalizing the law. And somehow our politicians, who are, in my view, not representative of the population, have been blocking this for decades. They are overly responsive to somehow the preference of very conservative people, of also medical groups, which I have to say have been also very influential in blocking these decisions, and for very good reasons. It's not like their arguments are wrong, but is it democratic to deny a vast majority, of people like that what they really want? So there again, Macron thought, you know what, that's a very good question to put to a citizens' assembly. After all, they did it in Ireland on abortion and marriage equality, and it worked. So what happened is that they had a sample deliberate on marriage equality, then put it to a referendum, and it passed, the liberalization of the law to allow gay people to marry other gay people. And then on abortion, same thing. They had a sample of 100 randomly selected Irish people come together, just talk about whether they thought that the current system, which criminalized abortion under any form, should be liberalized to allow abortion under constraints. And I don't know, it sounds in the 21st century, you'd think that's kind of like the reasonable compromise. And that's what they decided. It went to a referendum and it passed in 2018 with 66% of the voting population. So it's considered a massive achievement. So Macron saw that and thought, okay, my first convention wasn't like that much. So I'll do a second one. The second one, I was appointed on the governance committee.
Yeah, you were the co-governor of it?
I was one of 15 people on it who were in charge of like running it and making it happen and making decisions about, okay, what are we doing this weekend? What are we doing next weekend? What experts are we bringing in, etc. Which, is I have issues with the fact that it's people like me in charge, actually. Even that I would like to.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that one, I think, ran logistically really well. I mean, in fact, because the topic to me was relatively, I mean, if you have 80% in the public who are in favor, you're likely to have the same sort of split in the assembly. Interestingly, after deliberation, it appears that there were fewer people in favor of it, but not that many. So we ended up with a split of 76 to 24. But at the end of the process, also like 8 weekends or so, 94% of the participants voted in favor of the final report, which was recommending a liberalization of the law to make it possible to have access to assisted dying or euthanasia under constraints. And why is that? It's because the minority, who had been very vocal and very well listened to, another thing that I'm very proud of, and I explained in the book how we avoided the mistake of silencing them, which could have happened. They shaped the report massively by emphasizing something that the pro-movement wasn't really thinking of as much, which was investing massively in palliative care. So palliative care is basically special units in hospitals, and where people who are dying and for whom you cannot do anything anymore are taken care of, reassured, and given the most comfortable way of, basically dying. And it's true that it's very underinvested in France, understaffed. And yet our population is aging very rapidly. And so it seems like common sense. You would think that the government would have thought of that before. So anyway, so first half of the report was about investing in palliative care. Second half was about, even for those for whom even that isn't the solution, there would be an option to.
Yeah. And then you had a dance party till 1 a.m.
Yes. So, okay. So I'll tell you the biggest surprise, one, of these assemblies for me, because I came to them as an academic, very interested in the more cerebral, cognitive, serious stuff. And then it turns out it was about that too, right?
Yeah.
It was about the civic love between participants. And I say love intentionally because it was intense and passionate. It was not just like, oh, we're friends and we respect each other. It was truly like the words they used, the body language they displayed, the stuff they said to each other. It was love. And then the other big surprise for me was the joy. Because when they called me, when the CESUs, the jolly hostess, who's not that jolly in that case, the organizing institution called me, I said, of course, I'd love to be a part of this governance committee. What's the topic? And they said, the end of life. Like, oh my God. So I thought, that's going to be too heavy. That's going to be too heavy. I don't know if I can do it. But then, okay, I had to do it. So I did it. And it turns out it was one of the most joyful experiences of my life. Incredible. Like, people joked, people cried. They cried a lot. I mean, some stories were just horrible. And but somehow it's interesting in human groups when things get heavy, there's a sort of survival instinct maybe that kicks in, and so people diffuse the heaviness with things like humor, and so we thought, do we want to party on this heavy subject? Maybe not. And so we waited a little too long. I think we should have had it earlier. But towards the end, we threw a party, and it was cathartic. People, everybody, the president of the CESU danced until 1 a.m. too. And I saw people, it was just wonderful, beautiful, an affirmation of life.
Yeah. I have one more question for now, and then I'm going to be opening it up. So think about questions you have for Hélène. So you speak about politicians as sort of the opposite of shy, a self-perpetuating political class serving the interests of the wealthy and connected.
Yes, it's not very nice.
And many of our students have come from, they're not that class, but many of our students have come from government and are hoping to go back into government. Some of them are even here on scholarships where to get the scholarship, you have to promise to run for office within 5 years.
Oh, wow.
So in order for them to avoid ending up like that, which I'm sure they wouldn't, what advice do you have for them about their future political careers?
Great question. Well, okay, if I continue in the vein of provocation that I think this book is about, after all, work towards bringing about your own demise as a class, and try to I mean, again, if it's a 200-year project and we think that this is not a matter of personality. I think there are lots of wonderful people. It's just a matter of incentives and selection bias.
Yeah.
So it's not a judgment of persons. I really want to say that loud and clear. It's just a theory and an observation of what happens when you select people by election versus by lot. So if you have the privilege of having access to these places of power, and you're still motivated by the public good, which unfortunately many stop being after spending too much time in those spheres, then. And if you're convinced by the argument, maybe you're not, maybe you have a counter argument as to why elected officials are absolutely indispensable. And it's just that I'm very suspicious of when politicians say that, because it's such a self-serving argument. I was on BBC4 a couple of weeks ago, paired with a politician that I'm not going to name, and he's very nice again. But he was invoking these arguments about how the function of a politician also relies on the virtues, the virtue and character. I'm like, well, it's not for you to say. It's like the conflict of interest there is just blatant. So anyway, so if you get there and if you're, sincerely motivated by the public good, then maybe try to bring about the creation of permanent citizens' assemblies that at least would correct for some of the massive blind spots of elected ones. And because of course it's a provocation, this book, but the reality is that politics without politicians, you can understand it in two ways, right? One is the radical utopian, purely theoretical vision where you start from scratch, where you get rid of the politicians. I don't think it's doable, pragmatic, desirable, given that where we're starting from.
Yeah.
So there's another understanding of politics without politicians in the book, which is, well, it's just to create space within the system for the shy and everyone in a way that is centering lot-based assemblies. Because I don't know, like, it's not like as if I know exactly what's going to happen and what the relationship between two bodies like that would how it would work.
Yeah.
But to me, we kind of did that already when we moved from monarchy, absolute sovereigns, to aristocracies in a way with like upper chambers who are kind of a check on the sovereign, on the absolute despot, but themselves constituted of mostly extremely elite types.
Yeah.
To then later elected parliaments, which were supposed to be these popular chambers. And in fact, because they were seen as popular, were not given a decision power immediately. They were purely advisory for the longest time. But somehow their legitimacy was much higher than the upper chambers. So it's over 200 years, they displaced the appointed chambers of aristocrats. So that now the House of Lords...
Not in the UK.
Well, I mean, the House of Lords is mostly ornamental at this point, right?
Well, it depends on the topic.
Really? Okay, well, I thought it was more... Okay, well, but they have much less power than they had 200 years ago.
And the composition has changed.
And meanwhile, the parliament is really the center of power.
Yeah.
So what I'm foreseeing, if you want, is if we manage to figure out, and I'm not saying it should happen tomorrow. I think there's a lot of things that we still need to figure out, including how to make these assemblies truly autonomous, not governed by people like me, but self-governed. So once we figure that out, then you create a permanent institution where you rotate randomly selected citizens every year, maybe, or 2 years, I don't know. It's another thing. How long is long enough? And they have their own civil servants that are supporting them, providing the information, etc., etc. And then over time, we'll see how the balance of power between institutions evolve or not, and where we find an equilibrium.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to open it up to questions. I knew there would be a lot. Please introduce yourself briefly. Yes. Here, just behind. Thanks, Johnny.
Hi, I'm Alice. I'm an MPP student, but I actually stood in the general election in 2024. And spoiler, I lost, hence why I'm here. My question, it kind of covers things that both of you work on. But in the UK, obviously, the Labour Party at the moment are going through the process of taking people out of the legal process by getting rid of jury service. And so in the context of what you've spoken about, what do you think about that? Because actually removing people from that legal process, that actually gives a different perspective on people's crimes.
You're talking about the current bill that wants to eliminate jury trials? Yeah, no, I think it's very worrying to me. And I understand...
You write a lot about juries.
I write a lot about juries. To me, there's the mini version of what I have in mind. That it's the same sort of animal, if you want. It's ordinary people, groups of peers that make decisions. And for me, actually, often juries are portrayed as this fact-finding bodies that are completely apolitical. And we know the history of juries is not apolitical. Sometimes they decide to nullify a decision because they think the law is unjust. So it is a political form of... it's a political institution, even though their political nature is not revealed all the time. It's kind of like, kept constrained. So I think it's a big problem, and I understand the critiques. I mean, it's not like they don't have a good point. It's about cost, it's about efficiency, but I wouldn't start by cutting, in what is the most democratic aspect of our democracies in a way. I think to me it's just another symptom of the oligarchization of our systems. That there's less and less room for the voice of people who have no other access for voice and power, because people on juries really come from anywhere. So I think symbolically it's extremely worrying to me.
And I would just add in from a sort of domestic law perspective that there's a lot of protest against this. Just 2 days ago, I think there was 3,200 lawyers wrote to the government asking them to drop the plan. And they cited research, and I think more research needs to be done. But the justification is, as you say, saving time and costs. And that research shows that it would be a 2% saving of costs and time.
And not to mention that, as far as I know, the empirical social scientific evidence is that systems that have jury trials are actually, there's more satisfaction with the justice system than among the population than in countries where they don't have it. So why would you want to further worsen the lack of we have a problem of legitimacy right now. People, you mentioned some figures, elected leaders are not liked. People don't trust the police, the justice, or at least it's not as high as it should be. Why do you want to make things worse? I think it's a very counterproductive move.
Hands up again. I'm going to take one from here and then I'll come there. Yes, there in the middle.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jana. I'm a third-year PhD student at King's College London.
Yes, sorry. There was someone behind you as well.
Oh,
okay,
sorry.
Right. I'm making a list. Please, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I look forward to reading the book. I think the examples that you gave of the citizens' assemblies are very sort of pertinent examples of issues that kind of affect everyone, where citizens' assemblies work really well. But I was wondering how your alternative model of democracy would make sure that the issues of those people made shy by being failed by the system or excluded are taken into account as much as those kind of affecting everyone, whether representation plays a role for that still or...
Well, so the model I have in mind is a little different actually from the practice of citizens' assemblies. Citizens' assemblies have always been done on single issues, sometimes very large, like climate justice, you might say, but it's never holistic in the sense that it's not like a party platform where you have to have a vision for the country for the next 4 years. I would prefer a system where you focus on a sort of central assembly that sets a vision for the country based on the input of everyone, so using crowdsourcing techniques, using public hearings, using
AI,
data sensing and all of that, and generating a program that seems aligned with most people, and then you put it potentially to a referendum if some issues are really salient and tricky, and you have a multiple choice questionnaires where people say yes, no, etc. They did it in Iceland, for example. I think they do it also in Switzerland routinely. It's completely doable. And then you implement that. And the idea is that the shy in the assembly would find their voice. That's a place where they are actually more likely to find it rather than and they would bring their concerns or to the group, and if the deliberation works well, the group should include it. So is it a guarantee? No. So you might have to build accountability mechanisms or supplements to focus specifically on the most vulnerable of the shy, those that are both, really oppressed and very shy and really, like, even that can get to their concerns. So, because I'm not, I don't believe that I don't think there's any system that is foolproof. There will always be some kinds of blind spots, etc. It's just, I think that one would minimize them. But if you have ideas about how to make this even more, inclusive, I would love to hear them.
In the third row.
Well, thank you. I'm Gonzalo Ilandro. I'm a postdoc at Nuffield College. I had two questions. The first one was just asked, right? How does the idea of the lottery speaks about the representation of marginalized groups, right? So groups that might require, more active engagement and some aggregation and amplification, like that's the main function that parties meet in society. But you just answered that. And the second is, I'm gonna be like professional elites, right? So when my car breaks, there's a limited set of things that I can do to fix it, right? And I can spend time trying to learn how to fix it, but I also can rely on someone who is specialized in knowing how to fix it, right? So.
Great. So actually, no, your first question is very good. I don't think I answered it satisfactorily. I think in an open democracy, you would still have social movements that would be, emerging bottom up and in a non-supervised way to focus on sort of niche issues or, burning minority issues that the system is kind of forgetting. I think, what I'm proposing is just an architecture for the formal decision making, but I mean, the rest of society is still there, and for sure it needs to form associations, movements, you need to have media, but you can't legislate that into life, it's, I sometimes I use this analogy of, I'm thinking of the coral reef, but the life forms around that. That's not for me to say what it would look like, but I assume, yes, you'd have social movements to push certain things, to campaign around referenda question, things like that. Then your second question, you assume somehow that politicians are specialists or experts, but they're not. They too rely on experts, and in fact, they outsource a lot of the legislative task, the actual writing of the law, to lobbyists, to lawyers, to special commissions. So, I mean, at that point, I'm curious about their added value apart.
They speak really well. They speak really well, and that's a quality for sure. But I think what I've seen is that the quality of the debates in the plenaries that I've seen among citizens is as high, if not higher, because there's not this bad faith induced by polarization and party mentality. So when they hear something that is convincing, no one cares who is saying. Like, it doesn't matter. Whereas in the debates we have, and maybe it's true, I'm more pessimistic because I live in the US and I'm so, exhausted by the toxicity of politics over there. But there's this partisan mindset where you will never support a policy, even if it's a good one, because it comes from the opposite camp. Whereas in citizens' assemblies, it's truly much more about, so then, okay, so if citizens can deliberate as well as politicians, if they can learn from experts just as much as politicians can, what is their added value? And I think it's knowing the system, building the relationships among, all the parts of the system. That maybe maybe there will be a loss of that. But my bet is that it's offset by the gains in sincerity, common good orientation, lesser corruption temptation, because they don't build these cozy relationships with lobbyists and corporations, and so, so that's my bet. Am I sure that I'm right? No, but I'm trying to give you the arguments as to why I believe that.
Nima.
Hi, thank you for coming here. My name is Nemo, and I am an MPP student, not planning to become a politician, but I was just wondering, I think your idea would work in many contexts. I think similarly in my country, I come from Somaliland, and most politicians, it's technically a democracy, but they're elected based on their clans, and only men usually are elected because, clans are patriarchal societies, and so women are expected not to contribute as much. And of course, richer people. So it's like a stereotype of who gets elected. My question is, practically, how what would the role of the bureaucracy look like in this context? Is this something that's only specific to maybe legislature and not necessarily the executive branch? How does that work in the different contexts? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so it's true that because I know less, African countries and emerging democracies, I was thinking more of like, so-called advanced democracies. But you're right that in such contexts, actually, the bar is even lower, because what we call democracies, they are actually kleptocracies in many ways, extremely corrupt. It's not representative at all in terms of demographics. So, and I'm married to a Serbian man, so I also know even the Serbian sort of democracy over there. It's also extremely corrupt. So it seems to me that elections do not fix those things. They tend to entrench them, if anything. So yes, you flip-flop between elites, but they do the same thing. They sell the country to corporations. It's really bad. So that could be then a viable model for potentially countries that are really, really at the point where they no longer believe in this system. But I think it would be too soon, because I haven't worked out the answer to your question about the executive, the judiciary, the bureaucracy. I mean, my shallow answer would say, okay, the bureaucracy needs to be the same way it should be here, on tap and not on top. They should be public servants. They often don't act like that. They act like they ought to be rulers. But if you create a professional body of civil servants, the ethos should really be embedded, and they should be at the service of citizens, even as they have so much power because they're permanent, whereas the citizens are not, and they have so much knowledge, and the citizens come with very little. But I think it's doable, and I talk in the book about how the Greeks did it. And the Greeks did it in a way that we cannot replicate, of course, but that says something about the proper position of the bureaucracy. They picked their bureaucrats among the slave population because they had engineers and treasuries and all kinds of very smart people. And they knew that if they took them from the free group, the group of free people, their knowledge, expertise combined with a legal status that give them the rights, certain rights, they would accrue too much power. So that's how they solved it. And obviously we can't have different political rights for the bureaucrats, but the idea that they really should be kept at the service, on top, etc., it's very important. The executive, I haven't thought too much about it. My view is that directly electing a president like we do in the US is really a dated method. It's too personalistic. It gives this person too much power. It changes the nature of the executive into an actual legislative. So for me, I would prefer a sovereign assembly that is selected by lot, and the executive is depersonalized, perhaps turned into a council of 7 people, like they have in Switzerland. And no one knows who they are, no one really cares, and they're there to serve as well. They're there to execute the recommendations and policies and laws that come out of the assembly. And then the judiciary, I also think that the Swiss model is very attractive to me, meaning that there is no Supreme Court that trumps the will of the people there. The final authority is the public. So yes, you would have a Supreme Court of some kind, but it's not supreme actually. It's just
It's the highest at that level, but not overall.
Yeah.
I had Eleanor next.
Hi, Alien.
I'd also just wait for the mic. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, Aliénor, also in the MPP and also a recovering French student hiding abroad. Thanks very much for this. Thank you very much for this. I'm very convinced about this type of organizing for our legislative. I'm wondering, I guess I had the main questions would be kind of in the implementation. With making it permanent, you're kind of assuming something like asking more than people just coming on the weekend. And so I guess you're kind of also asking people like, do they have to take a career break for a year and things like that? So I don't know if you've thought through some of this implementation of how do you professionalize it without then having a bunch of people try to evade it. Like we know some people try to escape jury duty because it actually is sometimes felt like a constraint when your society's not organized around it.
Yeah. So I haven't thought about it that deeply either. I think obviously you'd have to rethink the way the economy works so that people have a lot more leeway and freedom to leave their jobs for a few months, maybe even a few years. They would have to... I think my idea is that, if you know from the get-go, like, in primary school, you're taught about the system, and at some point you might have the honor of serving on a jury like that at the national level, but also at the local level, then you're kind of prepared to, it's like civil service, or what is it called, military service. It's going to be a 2-year break in your life at some point, and you kind of plan for it. Oh, it's hard because you don't know when it's going to happen, but it's much harder, it's true. And you'd be, right now no one is thinking of making it mandatory. That's a reality. It's just way too soon, and maybe it will never fly, actually. But we do need to make sure these bodies are as representative as possible, and so maybe working on incentives will be better. So you pay people, you take care of all their expenses. In a way, you could see it as an opportunity, right? For a lot of people, I was mentioning this person in a tiny village who, well, maybe their life wasn't going to go anywhere anyway, right? So for some people, it's actually an opportunity to go to London or Paris or Washington and discover a new world, discover people from all over the place, discover potential in them that they didn't know they had, leadership quality that they didn't know they had, learn to speak in public. Because what I love about the context of this assembly is that people help each other out.
Yeah.
And they celebrate when people find their voice. I have some anecdotes in there where you have this woman who's a former stutterer, so who all her life has kind of integrated the fact that she cannot speak in public ever. And she was made to speak in not so large a group, 30 people, but still. And when she was finished speaking, everybody clapped. They were like, "You're speaking, Arlette. You found you're growing." That's what they said, and it's very moving. So I think if you see it as an opportunity rather than a chore, which is also a matter of institutional design. How does the jolly hostess make such places inviting as opposed to punishing, right? And I don't have all the answer, but it's about the principle that you bring to the design, I think.
But you do go into quite a lot of detail on that, because you're even saying don't have it in a drab, boring office building.
Yes. Yeah, it's true, because
make it attractive.
Because the symbols really matter.
Yeah.
In Iceland, so I talk a little bit about Iceland, I studied it before, and I think the writing was on the wall when they put them in the prefabricated building in the burbs of Reykjavik. That's already signaling you don't matter.
Yeah.
Whereas the French really tried. They put them in a magnificent building in the center of Paris, next to the Eiffel Tower. That signals something that they felt, and that empowered them.
Yeah. We have a question here, and then, take this one. Oh, okay. I'm making notes.
Hello, I'm Hendrik. I'm studying social policy, so slightly different department. My question would be, if we think about the role of politicians and elections and something that might be helpful, what is about the supply of ideas and political ideas? I come from Germany, and we even have it in our constitution that political parties have to form the will of its citizens and kind of also supply a bit political ideas. And I know that in what's currently going on, especially in America, there's perhaps not a prime example for that, but I think citizens also inform themselves about politics when they have elections. There is, I think that's an aspect of also supply set. What do you think about that?
No, it's a great point. And I'm not saying parties didn't do that for a long time, and they still do that to an extent, but at least in the US, they've become rent-seeking machines for ambitious people. And I'm not sure they're performing that function very well at the moment. And you could say, well, let's just find a way to go back to the 60s and 70s where they were doing that for masses of people. Yes, or you could just say, in society, you will always have like-minded people coming together to form associations, to create platforms, to create a vision. And I don't know that we need to make them have the double function of formulating the vision and selecting the people who go to power. You could dissociate the functions, right? So I think in my model, you would still have associations of the like-minded. You can call them parties if you want, but they wouldn't be vehicles for political ambition in that sense. And they would still have an incentive to form and campaign, because in my model, it's not just about the citizen juries, it's about also referenda and moments of mass voting on the proposal that come from the citizen juries, but also on proposals that groups of people could themselves initiate and put on the agenda of kind of like on the Swiss model again. You can have top-down initiatives, top-down referenda, but you also have citizens' initiatives that then lead to a referendum. So I don't know why we have to think that parties as we know them are the end of history. You know?
Last row over here, yes.
Hi, I'm John. I work at the Government Outcomes Lab here at the school, but prior to that I was looking at participatory budgeting in Scotland, so I have a keen interest in all of this. It'd be good you touched on it briefly, but it'd be great to hear a bit more about the selection of experts in the Citizen Assembly.
Yeah.
I think there are some topics that I don't think it should be a 50-50 split.
Yeah.
It'd be good to hear more about that sort of sortition of it and who makes those decisions, I guess, at the very beginning.
Just out of curiosity, when you say 50-50, you mean
Like the same number as the
Sort
citizens.
of pros and against, sorry.
Pros and against.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, so the selection of experts, very good question. It's tough not to crack, and I'm not sure any citizen assembly has really cracked it. I think there's an ambition to have a plurality of views, a range of views, a balanced set of views, a neutral also. It's really very hard to square, but everybody tries. And right now, the decision is made by people like me, as I said. It's people on top of the structure who launch it, really, because before they are even selected, someone needs to prepare the groundwork for the assembly to even exist. And part of it is securing the presence of experts. That's done months ahead of time. So someone has to do it. And so typically it's going to be people like me. But it is problematic because we also come with biases. And so my solution would be to, once the assembly is formed and people come in and meet for the first time, the expert group surrenders the voting rights and say, we have a bunch of experts that we prepared for you. They're going to come and talk today because we didn't have time to ask you for your opinion until then. But from next week onward, or like the next session onward, you can make your own recommendations to us and we'll go and get them for you. So that way you solve the problem of who's deciding what's right or wrong, because it's up to them to make that decision. And so we don't know how to do it because it's never been done. So my plan this summer, we've raised money. We've convinced people to back us in Connecticut. We're going to have the first state-level citizens' assembly in Connecticut on the question of the funding and delivery of public services at the local level. And a key design feature that I want in there is that on day one, we surrender our voting rights, and then we see what happens. It's a big risky move because we could very much face plant. What if, this sample totally runs away with it and just it just gets totally chaotic? And sure, I'm not saying it's out of the realm of possibilities, but at some point, either you trust ordinary citizens or you don't, right? So I'm trying to put my money, although it's more like the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, where my mouth is.
So we had two in the second row. Did you have a question? Yes, and then Ash.
Hello, my name is Tom. I'm a retired publisher. I have a question about focus groups, because thinking about 100 members of the population influencing policy, isn't that actually what the professional politicians are already doing in their focus groups when they determine their policy for each election? So if a policy is not popular with their electoral base, they'll can the policy. They're already kind of self-moderating in policy terms based on probably a bigger statistical sample than 100 they're probably already doing this in some senses.
Yeah, they are, and I think their intuition is pretty much the intuition behind the Citizens' Assembly, which is that you need to ask the people you represent to give you a direction, right? But then it begs the question: why do we need the intermediary to a degree? Like, why don't we take the focus group and put it in charge? And second of all, I think from the point of view of political epistemology, I'm not convinced anymore that it's enough to hear the information that comes out of a focus group to fully integrate it and act on it. Because again, I think the people through which this information is filtered are too homogeneous, have too many of the same blind spots, so they pick and choose from the lesson that's coming out of the focus group. You know, like, information is always constructed in a way. It's data plus your interpretation. And I think the filter is wrong. It's skewing the interpretation. And so it's not enough to have the information. You need also the filter to be changed. And my view is that the filter should be a random sample rather than an elected sample. See what I mean? It's truly like a lens. The current lens is deforming, whereas I think you'd get a more accurate picture through a citizens' assembly.
And Ash, just along the same row.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Ash. I'm a teaching associate here in the MPP program. I have a question about applying your model in divided, unequal, fractured, otherwise imbalanced societies, because it seems that there are some immediate concerns with how you represent competing interests. And I'm curious in your thoughts on two sort of particular situations. One is actually Switzerland.
What's what?
One is Switzerland, where you have a largely homogenous Swiss population, and then you have a population in some areas up to 40 to 50% international, who are deprived of the right to vote, who don't have a say in these things, and who every 2 or 3 years, Switzerland runs a referendum asking if they should remove us from the country. And generally it lands on 51% no. But we have no say and no involvement in it, and the Swiss constitutional model, for all of its benefits, still excludes those voices. The other I have in mind is countries with large indigenous populations, and particularly ones with a very strained relationship between the government and the indigenous communities. I'm from one of those myself. I can see some real challenges potentially arising if you were to run a citizens' assembly in New Zealand, for example, dealing with constitutional issues or Māori issues, partly because it touches on very real fault lines, and also because it's very hard to guarantee the kind of balance between these and this sort of situation fundamentally opposed views of how things should be run. But yeah.
Okay, great question. So on Switzerland, I have to say Switzerland is a bit of a puzzle to me, because on one hand, it's one of the oldest sort of, the country with one of the oldest democratic tradition, right? Centuries, really. They've managed to handle great linguistic and religious diversity. And you could say, well, it's just a bunch of Christian sects, really. But at the same time, in the rest of Europe, those sects were killing each other, and they didn't in Switzerland. And I think it's because of their local tradition of participation and listening to each other and trying to work together. So why is it that they gave the right to vote to women so late, like 1971? Why is it that right now the right-wing majority in parliament cancelled a planned citizens' assembly in Geneva on democracy and how to reinvent it? It's a really conservative country in many ways. So I don't know if it's cultural or it has to do with our traditions or democratic traditions, or maybe democracies are a little conservative in some ways. So on Switzerland, I don't have the answer. It's a puzzle, and it's not a country that I know that well, to be honest. I'm just puzzled and fascinated by their institutional choices that are not really replicated anywhere. Although I'm told Uruguay copied the constitution of Switzerland. I don't know if it's true, but Uruguay has a lot of direct democracy mechanisms, and that allowed them to block measures, neoliberal measures of privatization of water management and stuff like that were happening all over South America, and that didn't take place in Uruguay because of the direct democracy mechanism. And so they were protected from that because of that. So
interesting.
The second question, I'm not sure I fully understood, but I think it was about indigenous population that are too small and would not be sufficiently represented in the assembly. So I just want to say, look, what I'm proposing here is a simple model, right? And then you can complicate it. But it's not as if elected assemblies are doing such a great job with indigenous rights anyway, right? So again, I just want to make sure the bar is appropriately placed. The comparison is appropriately constructed. But you could envision oversampling indigenous population. That's what, for example, Jim Fishkin did for some of his deliberative polls in Australia, where if you relied on lot purely, you might end up with an assembly with 1 or 0 indigenous person. So he made sure there was a quota for that. So you do that through stratified random sampling, and you can. The problem when you do that, though, is that if you start breaking the principle of roughly 1 person, 1 lottery ticket, and singling out 1 minority, then you have other minorities starting to claim the right to be oversampled as well. It gets very tricky. So you want to do it only when they are like really long-standing, historic sort of cleavages, like the one you're mentioning. But I could see it happening. That could be a departure from the pure theory I have in there.
Question over here in the third row. Okay, and then.
Hi, Udit Bhatia, King's College London. I'm obviously very sympathetic to sortition. Like you, I'm very critical of political parties, but I think there's a worry, which is, and 2 worries really. Firstly, parties are very sticky, right? They're not going to go away. And the second worry is that at the moment, these citizens' assemblies we're seeing around the world, they're kind of low stakes in some ways. They're not solidified. They're sporadic. Once they become more permanent features of our governance system, and they've been around for a while, I can imagine, just think what might happen 40 years from now.
Yeah.
By the time people go into these assemblies, they already know there are party groupings, and they'll go sort themselves into those party groups. They know that the party outside has said, this is what we'd like you to say. So by the time they go into these assemblies, they're acting more like parties, just because society is polarized, and therefore by the time people go in, they're just sorting themselves naturally. I don't think that's damaging to the position, but I think it's a risk that we probably should acknowledge, and I wonder if there are ways we might be able to address the resurfacing of the party, even in sortition.
So I hadn't heard that counter argument before, so I need to think about it. So you're saying the parties outside would look at the list of participants that have been selected and immediately figure out who is aligned with what party, and go to them and say, hey, we know you're registered as a socialist, and we want you to push this agenda? Like they would try to manipulate them like that?
No, more that the parties exist, and they say, well, our position on this debate is X. And by the time these ordinary citizens then go in, they're already clubbing around. They're saying, well, I'm a Democrat.
Oh, I see. Well, okay, so I'll tell you my experience, which was really interesting on the Citizens' Convention on the end of life. As I said, the outside public was roughly split 80%, 20%. So inevitably, when we split the group of 184 into subgroups of 10 or 12, you had 8 in favor and 2 against, and those 2 felt very silenced. They felt like they didn't dare to speak their truth, and they came to us because we had office hours and we were trying to sense the problem. They said, I feel like a medieval alien. I remember this woman telling me, like, when I talk about my faith, they look at me with disgust, So that's bad. And so one solution we thought of was and they asked us, no, actually it wasn't our idea. They came to us and they said, we would like to be able to meet in opinion groups, which are kind of like parties, you might say. We want to be able to meet with each other, find each other, strengthen our position, and feel like we're not alone. And we had a long debate about that, because on the one hand, we couldn't go on with an assembly that was fracturing and people feeling completely alienated and who might have left or denounced the illegitimacy of this process. But on the other hand, the idea of creating opinion groups when everything else was sortition-based was kind of like a risk. We were going to reintroduce partisanship pretty much. So we took the risk. We let them, as we should, have their opinion groups. And it really solved the problem beautifully. They basically found each other, regained confidence in their own voice, were able to now counter other people. And in fact, it helped the majority respect them more. It was very interesting. The majority members even like helped them beef up their argument once they understood that this was a dialectical exercise. And really, so it really worked beautifully. The thing that happened though, there was more respect, but there was a little less love. So it sort of diluted a little bit the fusional relationship. So it did reintroduce the sense of us versus them. So that's a very fine line, and I don't know how sustainable it would be if you had it for many, many months. That said, what I would say is that because of the bond they forge early on, before they even know what side they're on, often, I think it's feasible in that context to trade that fine line between allowing some amount of partisanship and recognition that some people think alike and want to be together, and the need to maintain the melting pot and the deliberation across divides. So it's a lot more fluid than what we have in the US right now, where it's like groups are completely polarized. They don't talk to each other. They demonize each other. They don't listen to anything the other side has to say, and they don't even look at the same facts. They don't have the same worldview.
All the same media. Yeah.
So at least in deliberative assemblies, you have these dynamics, and you have to let them emerge, obviously. But it remains fluid. It remains a conversation. And as long as we have a conversation and respect and even maybe an attenuated form of love once these things get out, but it's still very appealing model for me. I don't know if that answers the worry.
Asma is next, and then to the...
I could just speak up. If any
for the recording.
Hi, I'm Atma. I'm also an MPP student at the Blavatnik School of Government, hoping to be a politician in the future. So my question is that I come from India, so a very imperfect democracy and not an advanced democracy. So I understand that part. But elections as a system has been existing for so long. And I believe that there are things when they exist for so long, it's hard to kind of like go against it. And of course, we know the imperfections of it and we've studied the imperfections of it. And like Ash had said, with respect to indigenous communities and how their role will look when you're randomly selecting, I'm thinking about it from an Indian perspective, taking in maybe Dalit community, which are the scheduled caste community in India. And thinking about how even if you're randomly selecting 150 people, like the current electioneering system has these certain guardrails for a Dalit person in a room in an electioneering, whatever, legislative system. But if we select 150 random people, let's say there are 5 Dalits, but like there are these social cues that one has to follow with an upper caste person having such an immense amount of power. And even if they all are equal, like I find it extremely hard for me to accept it. Of course, I understand that in an advanced democracy, it varies. But like in a democracy like mine, I find it extremely, because there was a lot of fight that the people had to do against the government to get these guardrails. And now you're, or if we ask about overhauling the entire system and these new problems that doesn't have guardrails, like I just wanted your opinion on it.
Yeah. Very good question. So I'm curious though about, again, remember that I'm trying to also maintain the comparison, a fair comparison. So in the electoral system you describe, it's not as if the Dalits are talked to as equals, I imagine. They're still the same social cues. So, right? So you cannot ask my system to solve that. That's a cultural dimension that is there. And of course, the Citizens' Assembly will replicate that. There's nothing you can do about it in a way. Whatever inequalities exist in the larger population will find themselves. If it's a patriarchal society, women will suffer an epistemic deficit. They will be less believed. They will be talked over, etc. Okay, you can fix some of it by the procedures of the assembly. So you have facilitators in this context that will make sure, for example, men don't talk more than women, or you encourage you try to spread the representative functions evenly to bring out the shy. So for example, one thing we do is when we asked 2 women and 2 men to come sit on our governance committee meetings, we didn't just ask for volunteers. We plucked at random from the entire sample, and then we asked people, do you want to do it? You've been chosen, do you want to do it? And I think it makes a difference because you still have very shy people who will decline. Like that still happens. But some shy people say, you know what, like, I'll try. And they come and they try, and they find that they can do it. It's not above, it's not insurmountable. So for Dalits in a randomly selected assembly, if there is a sufficient number of them, if they can together find their voice, find their, maybe it won't be that different from having their own little quota in an elected assembly anyway. And additionally, because they will be forced to be also associating with people on the substance of things, not just through their identity to a caste, they will educate other groups about their capacity, their arguments, their humanity and their equality. And it will take time. It won't be overnight. But if you keep repeating the process and you expose upper caste members to lower caste members over time, over and over and over again, and meanwhile, the laws that come out of these assemblies reshape society in a way that tries to also lower the barriers between those castes and spread benefits and rights more equally. I could foresee a sort of a very slow virtuous cycle where you kind of like eventually, I don't know if it's possible, but erase the caste system.
Can I counter?
Yeah.
We get the knife.
I'm curious. I'm just really curious.
Yeah.
So the counter argument on the top of my head would be that, one of the people who ask the questions, which is that you have parties coming in as like a guardrail.
Yeah.
Like you have a Dalit party in India with certain number of seats, which kind of make sure that their voice is always spoken in the same way. So these parties whose entire objective is the identification behind them, like being a Dalit in itself, like has certain guardrails, I would say, because it's important to kind of appease to them. The politician has to appease to them in order to get those certain number of seats in this certain number of states, and therefore making sure that their voice is heard and their problems are addressed. In fact, affirmative action works for them. But I feel like maybe in the system, probably there should be another procedure. And I think there will be parties then popping up again in the system too as a result of identity.
Yes, but I have to say, I understand it's better than nothing, right? But this system also essentializes the caste identity in a way by making it so salient. Whereas what I saw in the French assemblies is that, for example, it's an interesting example. We had 7 people who tried to sink the assembly. They were, for religious reasons, I think mostly, determined to make the assembly fail because they were worried they would end up recommending liberalizing the law and end of life. And when you look at the composition of that group of 7, there was like a Muslim, a Catholic, so a black person, a white person, and I don't remember the rest. And so they were brought together not on the basis of the race or even the religion, but just on a fundamental opposition to allowing people to kill themselves. And I think they forged a bond, and I think the bourgeois woman from Deauville who hosted them on the coast to plan the planting of a story in the right media, and maybe it was the first time she was actually becoming friends with a black Muslim, I think it was a form of interesting cross section that I think breaks barriers while creating others, obviously, because they tried to sing the assembly, which was not good. But I think this politics to me is more appealing than the politics of, each group is going to be in their own bubble and fighting for their own interests in a way that just reinforces a division. And I understand maybe pragmatically that's the step and it's necessary.
we've got at least we've got 3 questions. So I'm going to take them together and then you can sum up. So in the middle first here.
Thank you. I'm a doctoral candidate in politics from King's College London. I was struck by your comment about how, like, I mean, you view yourself as an elite, in some capacity at least, and that you
What?
view as an elite in some capacity at least, and that you view your role as being limited to that of like paving the way for citizen assemblies, which kind of reminds me of what Cleisthenes did, for Athens. He was an elite who sort of put Athens on a democratic footing. But then, like, on the Athenian point, I haven't read the book yet, but then I saw, like, in the synopsis that you go back to Athens a lot. And if I understand correctly, and I might be wrong here about Athens, is that so isn't the ecclesia, the citizen assembly in Athens, like, is it meant for more like outspoken citizens? Because I remember that they open their meeting with like a phrase "tis agureven polite," which means like who here wishes to speak at the assembly. So won't like outspoken people then like be given some kind of preference? So I guess I would like to hear more about how your understanding of citizen assemblies differ from that of Athens. And my other question.
Quickly.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, my other question.
Yeah, we also have a
Let's just take
reception
one.
outside. Let's just do one and
Okay,
you can
okay.
be the reception. So we have I'm going to take the 3 and then you can answer collectively.
It's an interesting conversation, but it's the privileged people talking for the disadvantaged people in this room. You're all very elitist people, and
Well,
there's a
this
lot
will
of
go
history.
into the public, so
I know,
Yeah.
that's I'm here. I'm sorry, my name's Hamish Campbell. I live on a boat. I'm a journalist by profession. I come to a lot of these events. So there's a long history to this, which maybe you don't know, but activism has worked with affinity groups, which are very similar to assemblies, and it's functioned for hundreds of years. All the civil rights we have come from this activism of affinity groups. These, in the sort of early 90s, formal consensus came along and was imposed on these and destroyed the groups it was imposed on. This was then taken up by the EU, who funded code bases to do this. It failed. And the same people who did that jumped from activism, failed, jumped to code bases, failed, and now the same sort of people, and some sort of people, have jumped to assemblies. And they're doing a better job this time, I would admit. But, there's a long history of failure and not actually seeing what works at the actual grassroots where all social change happens. So it's the elitist people talking about the disadvantage without any representation of the actual disadvantage in the room, apart from maybe myself a little bit.
Okay. And then I've got a question online, which is that you've been sort of giving the indicators of shy behavior, but do you also look, or have you identified indicators of sincere behavior in these participatory processes?
Okay, so let me take the question on Athens first. So the more I read about Athens, the more I came to realize that, yes, the ecclesia is very important, but what I was interested in more was the Council of 500 that was setting the agenda and was based on that. Because as you correctly point out, in the assembly, there's a tendency to self-selection of well-spoken, ambitious politician types who, the orators, who could sway the assembly and led it in many cases to make terrible decisions, including choosing the demise of the democracy twice. Whereas in the Council of 500, which was based on lot, they were pulling from the peasant population, the artisan population, who presumably didn't speak that well. And so in this context, were able to say their piece and influence the agenda in a way that is more deliberative, more equal, in my view. That said, so I do think you need moments of mass participation, and there will be an element of self-selection. It's unavoidable as an accountability mechanism. So I'm not like my colleague Alex Guerrero, for example, who wrote a great book called Autocracy.
his model is purely lot-based, right? There's no ecclesia moment, there's no mass voting moment. He doesn't believe in that. I think for me, that's problematic. I would want to maintain a combination of both, because I think both have some issues that they counterbalance, the equal presence counterbalances. And what's interesting to me is that between the 5th century and the 4th century BC, Athens moved more towards the lot-based model because of what happened when the orators took over and brought the demise of the democracy. So they thought, you know what, it's a little risky, these open assemblies. So we're going to take some of the legislative power of this open assembly and give it to a new body that they created in the 4th century called I'm blanking out now, the nomothetai, so the lawmakers. And it was a sort of additional body, like a jury as well. There's a dispute as to whether it was randomly selected or not. My sources tell me my colleagues tell me it was randomly selected. So it seemed that they moved, with experience, they moved more and more toward a lot-based system. So that's why I'm drawn to this prior experience. So the elitism question, well, as I said, I think there's room for everyone. Social movements should do their thing. I'm not a social movement person. I actually, maybe that's also my resistance to parties. I don't like groups who think alike. That's temperamental. And I was never an activist. It's interesting because I'm only turning into one now, in a way, with that book. But I don't want to be a guru or a leader or a politician. So I'm just putting this book out for people to read. I tried to write it in a language that is as accessible as someone like me could, telling stories, sharing some of my life, being vulnerable. Does it mean that I should also go and meet activists? Sure, I could. I'm not sure that would be necessarily helpful or the best use of my skills and my time, but maybe you can convince me. I want to say also that I think there's a limit also to activism. It has a function, but it's not exclusive of what I'm proposing. When the Yellow Vest movement happened and the great national debate happened in response, so Macron said, let's convene 18 regional citizens' assembly, let's have local meetings, let's have a website, let's talk to each other, right? Well, the Yellow Vest, who thought this was a scam, said, we're going to have our true debate. So we hate the great national debate. We're going to have a true debate amongst ourselves. And I went to some of their meetings. It was activists and people who had a vision that was not the government one. And it was very touching. And I felt the same love among participants that I felt in these randomly selected assemblies. But it was also, to me, it also showed how difficult that approach is. They had no money, no spaces. They self-facilitated in ways that were extremely biased because some of these activists are just self-taught and they're not doing it necessarily very well. So they're learning. No, I'm telling you what my experience was, which was limited, but they were tired and they got cranky. And then by the end of the meeting, we were left, 10 people were left because it was too taxing and too demanding. So I'm in awe of people who devote, so much of their free time to these thankless activities of pushing an agenda. And I think, of course, we should actually probably help them do more. But I also think it's not exclusive of what I'm trying to do here, which is also talking to my people, the elites, to try to change a little bit their vision and make them see more, pay attention to people that they don't necessarily meet. So that's my defense. And your question was on
sincerity,
so sincerity
as well as shyness, yeah.
Because in Habermas, sincerity is a huge factor in the ideal speech situation. But then some political scientists have tried to operationalize that value, and they came to the conclusion that you cannot. Because sincerity is this internal thing and people know how to lie. So you just don't know when people are sincere or not. Even in citizens' assemblies, it's not always easy to tell.
Yeah. Well, as you said, this book is a provocation. As I said at the beginning, I don't think it could be more timely because we need fresh thinking, even if that thinking is based on the past. So thank you for sharing your time with us. Thank you for so generously and honestly answering these questions. And I invite everyone to join us in the forum outside to continue the conversation.
And if I make one request,
Yes.
so Pippa has the American cover.
Somehow I have the American version.
You guys have the
yes.
British cover, which has a glass of water. I would love to hear what you guys make of the cover, because I didn't choose it. I'm like really intrigued by the design choice. And finally, if you end up buying the book on Amazon at any point, I would be really grateful for a review, honest review, a sincere review, because apparently it helps the book find its readers. And since Iran was bombed, I have to say it's
yes.
yeah. So I would like more readers to it. So
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Taylor.